Adolf Hitler's final 24 hours began on April 29, 1945, deep underground in the Führer bunker as Soviet artillery shells turned Berlin into rubble above him. The bunker was cramped, damp, smelling of diesel fumes and unwashed bodies. By this point, Russian forces were less than a kilometer away. Hitler had already made his decision. Around midnight, he married Eva Braun in a brief civil ceremony conducted by a city councilman who'd been brought in specifically for this purpose. No celebration followed, just wine and small talk about death. Hitler spent part of the night dictating his political testament to his secretary, Traudl Junge, blaming Jews for the war and expelling Goering and Himmler from the party. He went to bed around 4 a.m. When he woke late on April 30th, he took lunch around 2 p.m. with his secretaries and cook, eating spaghetti with a light sauce. He was quiet, mechanical. Around 2:30, he said goodbye to staff members in the corridor, shaking hands, saying nothing of substance. He and Eva retreated to his personal study. At approximately 3:30 p.m., his valet, Heinz Linge, heard a single gunshot. When they opened the door, Hitler was slumped on a sofa, blood draining from a bullet wound to his right temple, a Walther pistol near his hand. Eva was beside him, dead from cyanide, her lips blue. The bodies were carried up a flight of stairs to the emergency exit, placed in a shell crater in the garden, doused with petrol, and set ablaze while Soviet shells exploded nearby. Benito Mussolini's last full day was April 27, 1945. He'd fled Milan the previous day, disguised in a German military greatcoat and helmet, riding in a convoy of retreating Wehrmacht soldiers headed toward Switzerland. He'd barely slept. His mistress, Clara Petacci, insisted on staying with him despite his warnings. Around 3 p.m. on the 27th, the convoy was stopped at a partisan checkpoint near the village of Dongo on Lake Como. The partisans were searching for fascists trying to escape. They checked documents, looked in truck beds. Someone recognized Mussolini hunched in the back of a truck despite his disguise. He was pulled out along with Clara and several fascist officials. They were held overnight in a farmhouse in the mountains. Mussolini spent the night sitting on a bed, smoking, not speaking much. Clara sat beside him. Early the next morning, April 28th, partisan leader Walter Audisio arrived with explicit orders from the resistance command. Around 4 p.m., Mussolini and Clara were driven to the Villa Belmonte in the tiny village of Giulino di Mezzegra. They were told to get out. Mussolini reportedly opened his coat and said, "Shoot me in the chest." Audisio fired a burst from a submachine gun. Both fell instantly. But that wasn't the conclusion. Their bodies were loaded into a moving van and driven through the night to Milan. At dawn on April 29th, they were strung up by their ankles from the metal girders of a bombed-out gas station in Piazzale Loreto, the same square where fascists had displayed executed partisans months earlier. Crowds gathered, threw vegetables, stones, spat on the corpses. Someone shot the bodies multiple times. A woman fired 5 shots into Mussolini, one for each of her dead sons. Nicolae Ceausescu woke on December 22, 1989, still believing he controlled Romania. He'd ruled for 24 years with absolute authority. That morning, he attempted to address a crowd from the balcony of the Central Committee building in Bucharest. But this time, something broke. The crowd began shouting against him, booing, chanting. You could see confusion on his face in the footage, his hand raised, trying to calm them. It didn't work. He and his wife Elena retreated inside, then fled to the roof where a helicopter waited. They lifted off around noon as protesters stormed the building below. The helicopter landed in various locations as the pilot claimed authorities were tracking them. Eventually, Ceausescu and Elena were dropped near a road and tried to commandeer a car. By evening, they were arrested in the town of Targovishta. They were held in a military base. For 3 days, they sat in detention, Elena complaining about the conditions, Nicolae largely silent. On Christmas Day, December 25th, they were brought to a small room for trial. A hastily assembled military tribunal charged them with genocide and corruption. The trial lasted 55 minutes. They were both found guilty. Immediately after the verdict, around 2 p.m., they were taken to a courtyard outside. Elena screamed at the soldiers, calling them traitors. Nicolae began singing the Internationale. A 3-man firing squad opened fire. Over 100 rounds were fired into both bodies in a span of seconds. A military cameraman filmed everything. Romanian television broadcast the execution that evening. Muammar Gaddafi spent his final morning on October 20th, 2011, trapped in Sirte, his hometown, which had become a war zone. NATO airstrikes and rebel forces had been pounding the city for weeks. Around 8 a.m., Gaddafi and a group of loyalists attempted to break out in a convoy of vehicles. French jets spotted them. At 8:30, a Hellfire missile struck the convoy. Vehicles exploded, survivors scattered. Gaddafi and his security chief fled into a drainage culvert beneath the highway, hiding in the concrete pipe. Rebel fighters found them around 12:30 p.m. p.m. Video captured on mobile phones shows Gaddafi being dragged out into sunlight, bleeding from his head, dazed, his golden pistol taken. "What did I do to you?" he asked in the footage. "What did I do to you?" A young rebel responded, "This is what you did to us." What happened next remains disputed in exact sequence, but the outcome is clear. Gaddafi was beaten, sodomized with a bayonet or rifle barrel, and shot multiple times. Some reports say he was executed on the spot, others that he died from wounds while being transported. His body was stripped and taken to Misrata, where it was placed in a commercial freezer. For 4 days, civilians queued to take photos with the corpse. The man who'd ruled Libya for 42 years ended in a refrigeration unit in a shopping area. Saddam Hussein spent December 29, 2006 in a cell at Camp Justice, an American military facility near Baghdad. He'd been sentenced to death by hanging 2 months earlier for crimes against humanity. He knew the execution was imminent. American guards reported he was calm, even dismissive, joking with some of them. He smoked cigars, read the Quran. Just after midnight, early on December 30th, American forces officially transferred him to Iraqi custody. He was taken to a building in Qadamiyah, a Shiite neighborhood of Baghdad, to the former military intelligence headquarters he'd once controlled. The execution was scheduled for dawn. Around 5 a.m., he was moved to a room that had been converted into an execution chamber. Witnesses later described him as composed. He refused the black hood traditionally offered. Around 6 a.m., he was led to the gallows. Iraqi officials and witnesses crowded the room. Some shouted sectarian insults as the noose was placed. Saddam recited the Shahada, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." Someone yelled, "Muqtada, Muqtada," referring to the Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. Saddam responded, "Is this your manhood?" The trapdoor opened at 6:05 a.m. His neck broke. A mobile phone video captured everything, leaked within hours, showing his body swinging. The execution was deliberately scheduled for the first day of Eid al-Adha, Islam's holiest festival, a timing that sparked international condemnation. Joseph Stalin's final day began not with drama, but with routine. On the evening of February 28, 1953, he watched a film at the Kremlin, then returned to his dacha at Kuntsevo. He dismissed his guards around midnight, which was typical. He usually slept until late afternoon. But on March 1st, he didn't emerge from his room. His guards waited, nervous. They were under strict orders never to disturb him. By evening, around 10 p.m., a guard finally entered and found him lying on the floor near his bed in a puddle of urine, unconscious. He'd suffered a massive stroke, likely many hours earlier. The guard called Stalin's inner circle: Beria, Malenkov, Khrushchev, Bulganin. They arrived, but didn't immediately call doctors. Why? Historians have debated this extensively. Some believe they wanted him to die. Others think they were afraid of being blamed if he recovered and learned they'd acted without permission. Whatever the reason, doctors weren't summoned until the morning of March 2nd, roughly 12 hours after he was found. When physicians finally arrived, they found Stalin semi-conscious, unable to speak, the left side of his body paralyzed. They could do nothing. For the next 3 days, he lay dying slowly while his associates maneuvered around his bedside, already positioning themselves for power. He died on March 5th at 9:50 p.m. The man who'd killed millions died slowly, helplessly, surrounded by people who may have deliberately let him suffer. Hideki Tojo knew September 11th, 1945 would bring the Americans. Japan had surrendered, war crime arrests had begun. Around 4 p.m., American military police surrounded his modest home in Tokyo. As they approached, Tojo retreated inside and shot himself in the chest with a pistol, aiming for his heart. He missed. The bullet punctured his lung, but didn't kill him. American medics rushed in and saved his life, performing emergency treatment on his living room floor. An American doctor had marked Tojo's chest with charcoal earlier during surveillance to identify where his heart was, but Tojo's shot still missed the mark. He survived and stood trial for 3 years. His final day came December 23rd, 1948. He spent it in Sugamo prison, writing letters to his family and meeting with a Buddhist priest. He showed no remorse for Japan's actions during the war, maintaining that he'd served the emperor faithfully. Around midnight, he was led to the execution chamber along with 6 other convicted war criminals. He was second to be hanged. The execution took place at 12:20 a.m. His last statement was, "I am grateful to the emperor for his benevolence." His body was cremated, ashes scattered in the Pacific Ocean at an undisclosed location to prevent any memorial shrine. Julius Caesar's final day, March 15th, 44 BC, started with warnings. His wife Calpurnia woke from nightmares, begging him not to attend the Senate meeting. A soothsayer had warned him weeks earlier to beware the Ides of March, and that day had arrived. Friends urged caution, but Caesar went anyway, arriving at the theater of Pompey around around midday where the Senate was temporarily meeting. Approximately 60 senators were part of the conspiracy to kill him, though only about 23 would actually strike. As Caesar entered and took his seat, the conspirators gathered close under the pretense of petitioning him. Tullius Cimber grabbed his toga from behind, the signal. Casca struck first, stabbing him in the neck. Caesar spun, using his metal stylus to stab Casca in the arm. But then the others closed in. Blades came from all directions. Caesar fought, trying to escape, but there were too many. When he saw Marcus Brutus among the attackers, he reportedly stopped resisting, pulled his toga over his face, and collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue. He was stabbed 23 times. Medical analysis suggests only one wound was fatal, severing a major artery. He bled out on the Senate floor while his assassins fled. His body lay there for roughly 3 hours before 3 slaves carried it home on a litter, one arm hanging down, dragging along the street. Maximilien Robespierre's final hours on July 27th to 28th, 1794 showed how quickly revolutionary power could turn. He'd sent thousands to the guillotine during the Terror. That afternoon, he attempted to speak at the National Convention. Deputies shouted him down. "The blood of Danton chokes you," someone screamed. A decree for his arrest was passed. That evening, Robespierre and allies barricaded themselves in the Hôtel de Ville. Around 2 a.m. on July 28th, troops loyal to the convention stormed the building. In the chaos, a pistol shot shattered Robespierre's lower jaw. Historians still debate whether he tried to kill himself or a soldier shot him. Either way, he survived. He spent the remaining hours lying on a table in an anteroom of the Committee of Public Safety, blood soaking through makeshift bandages, unable to speak, his jaw hanging grotesquely. Crowds gathered outside to jeer. Around 5 p.m., he was taken directly to the Place de la Révolution without trial. The executioner ripped the bandage from his jaw. Robespierre screamed. Seconds later, the guillotine blade fell. 21 of his associates were executed immediately after, their heads displayed to cheering crowds. Emperor Nero spent his final hours on June 9th, 68 AD, fleeing Rome on horseback. The Senate had declared him a public enemy and ordered his death by ancient punishment, beaten to death with rods. He rode toward a villa owned by his freedman Phaon, about 4 miles from the city. It was early morning when he arrived, hiding in a small basement room. He could hear soldiers approaching. His companions urged him to commit suicide before capture. Nero couldn't bring himself to do it. He kept pacing, saying repeatedly, "What an artist dies in me," obsessed with his legacy as a performer. He held a dagger to his throat multiple times but couldn't push. Finally, with soldiers literally at the door, his secretary Epaphroditos helped him drive the blade into his neck. A centurion burst in moments later, tried to stop the bleeding with his cloak, pretending he'd come to save him. Nero's last words were reportedly, "Too late, this is fidelity." He was 30 years old. His reign had descended into paranoid madness. He ended it unable to face death without assistance, in a servant's quarters, still thinking about his performances. Slobodan Milosevic's final day, March 11th, 2006, was spent alone in his cell at the UN detention center in The Hague. He'd been on trial for genocide and war crimes for 4 years, defending himself, turning proceedings into political theater. His health had deteriorated significantly. High blood pressure, heart problems. That morning, guards found him dead in his bed during a routine check around 10 a.m. An autopsy revealed myocardial infarction, a heart attack. But complications emerged. Tests found traces of rifampicin in his blood, a drug used to treat tuberculosis and leprosy that counteracts blood pressure medication he was taking. Questions arose. Did he obtain this drug deliberately to worsen his condition? Was it suicide by self-medication? The tribunal launched an investigation but reached no definitive conclusion. Milosevic died before hearing a verdict. The man responsible for over 200,000 deaths during the Yugoslav wars never faced legal judgment, his trial unfinished, his guilt technically unresolved. His supporters claimed conspiracy, his opponents felt cheated of justice. Rafael Trujillo spent May 30th, 1961 behaving normally, which was his mistake. He'd ruled the Dominican Republic with absolute brutality for 31 years, creating a police state where informants were everywhere. But that evening, he followed his routine, being driven along the coastal highway towards San Cristobal to visit his mistress. His driver, his only companion in the car, 7 assassins waited in 2 cars near kilometer marker 7. Around 10 p.m., they intercepted his blue Chevrolet Bel Air. Gunfire erupted immediately. The driver died instantly. The car swerved. Trujillo, despite being 69, grabbed a pistol from the glove box and exited the vehicle, firing back at his attackers. He hit one conspirator in the shoulder, but they had automatic weapons. Multiple rounds struck him in the chest, abdomen, back. He collapsed on the roadside. The conspirators, suddenly realizing what they'd done, panicked. They loaded his body into their car and drove around for hours, uncertain of their next move. Eventually, they hid the corpse in the trunk of a car owned by one conspirator's uncle, where it remained for nearly 18 hours. When authorities finally recovered it, Trujillo was embalmed and briefly displayed before his family took the body to Paris for burial. The dictator who'd controlled every aspect of Dominican life spent his final hours bleeding out on asphalt, then hidden in a car trunk like garbage.